Arvind, Kavita, Naina, and Raj, four lives intertwined by ambition, desire, and betrayal, were about to collide in a chain of events no one could have predicted. What began as ordinary routines and secret longings would soon spiral into a deadly web of lies, passion, and murder, leaving a quiet suburban community haunted forever. Please subscribe for daily new update of Crime Story and watch till end. Arvind Malhotra's life in the United States looked like a success story that many people dreamed of. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in New Jersey, where rows of similar houses stood neatly along clean streets. Every morning, he left home at the same time, dressed in formal clothes, carrying a laptop bag that showed his professional life was stable. Arvind had moved from India nearly a decade ago with big hopes. He believed America would give him respect, money, and security, and in many ways, it did. He worked as a software consultant for a large company and earned enough to support his family comfortably. At home, his wife Kavita managed everything with care. She focused her life on their young son, school routines, and household responsibilities. From the outside, they looked like a disciplined Indian family that had adjusted well to life in a foreign country. They attended community events, celebrated festivals with other Indian families, and kept a respectful distance from neighbors. No one ever heard arguments or noticed any unusual behavior. Everything appeared controlled and peaceful. But beneath this calm surface, Arvind felt a growing emptiness. Long working hours, constant pressure to perform, and the absence of extended family slowly started affecting him. Kavita was busy with her responsibilities, and emotional connection between them faded over time. Days passed without meaningful interaction, and silence became normal in the house. Arvind began to feel invisible within his own family, even though he was providing everything financially. Living far from India added to his isolation. The cultural warmth he once knew was missing. Festivals felt incomplete. Phone calls with relatives became shorter, and friendships remained formal. Arvind often felt trapped in a routine that had no space for emotions. He started spending more time at work, not because he loved it, but because it kept him distracted. His job required frequent travel, which gave him temporary freedom from his personal life. At night, when the house was quiet, Arvind struggled with his thoughts. He questioned whether this was the life he had worked so hard to build. He felt guilt for feeling unhappy, because from society's view, he had everything. This inner conflict slowly changed him. He became less patient, more withdrawn, and emotionally distant. Small responsibilities felt heavy, and happiness felt forced. No one around him noticed these changes clearly. Kavita assumed stress was part of professional life in America. Friends believed Arvind was simply focused on his career. Even Arvind himself did not realize that he was standing at the edge of a dangerous path. His need for emotional connection and understanding was growing stronger each day. He did not know that this silent loneliness would soon push him toward a decision that would change many lives forever. The training event in Chicago was meant to be routine, just another professional requirement that Arvind had attended many times before. The hotel conference hall was filled with people from different departments, most of them strangers, all focused on presentations, schedules, and career growth. Arvind did not expect anything memorable from this trip. For him, it was simply an escape from home and a break from his repetitive life in New Jersey. He believed a change of environment might help clear his mind. During one of the networking sessions, Arvind noticed Naina. She stood apart from the crowd, confident yet reserved. Unlike others who tried hard to impress, Naina carried herself with quiet assurance. She was an Indian-origin marketing executive who had spent most of her adult life in the United States. Her professionalism immediately caught Arvind's attention, but what truly connected them was familiarity. In a room full of different accents and cultures, seeing someone who shared similar roots felt comforting. Over the next few days, their interactions increased naturally. They were assigned to overlapping sessions, shared common interests in work ethics, and spoke about adjusting to life away from India. Naina had gone through a painful divorce years earlier and had rebuilt her life through determination and independence. Arvind admired her strength, especially because he felt weak inside despite his stable life. Her clarity and confidence filled a gap he did not know how to explain. As the event continued, Arvind found himself looking forward to seeing her. He felt a sense of ease that had been missing for years. There was no pressure, no expectations, just understanding. For Naina, Arvind appeared reliable and mature, someone who understood responsibility and struggle. Their shared experiences as Indian professionals in America created a bond that felt safe at first. After the training ended, they stayed in touch through work-related communication. Messages that began with professional topics slowly became personal. Arvind started sharing his frustrations, something he had stopped doing long ago. Naina listened without judgment. She offered emotional support, which made Arvind feel valued again. This connection gave him a sense of life beyond obligations. Both of them knew the situation was risky. Arvind was married, and Naina was aware of it from the beginning. Still, the emotional closeness grew stronger with time. The distance between their cities made it easier to justify everything as harmless. They convinced themselves that it was only friendship, even when the attachment deepened. As weeks passed, Arvind felt more alive than he had in years. His routine felt lighter, and his stress seemed manageable. Naina, on the other hand, slowly invested more emotionally. She had spent years protecting herself from pain, but this connection weakened her defenses. What started as a simple bond based on familiarity and support quietly crossed into forbidden territory. Neither Arvind nor Naina realized that this new connection was not bringing peace, but setting the foundation for chaos. The comfort they found in each other was built on secrecy, and secrecy as a way of demanding a heavy price. As time passed, the connection between Arvind and Naina stopped feeling casual. What once felt light and supportive slowly turned intense and demanding. Their communication became more frequent, often late at night or early in the morning. Arvind began to structure his days around moments when he could connect with her. He deleted messages carefully and avoided using shared devices at home. Secrecy became part of his routine, and with it came constant fear of being discovered. Arvind's work schedule started changing. He volunteered for projects that required travel and extended hours. Each business trip became an opportunity to spend time away from home and closer to Naina. He told himself that these choices were necessary for his career, but deep down, he knew the truth. The distance between him and his family grew wider with every excuse he made. Kavita sensed the emotional shift, but did not fully understand it. Arvind was present physically, yet absent in every other way. Naina's feelings deepened faster than Arvind expected. Living alone had made her emotionally vulnerable, and the attention Arvind gave her filled a long-standing emptiness. She began to imagine a future where secrecy would no longer be necessary. For her, the relationship was no longer a temporary escape, but something meaningful and permanent. This imbalance in expectations quietly created tension. Arvind, however, lived in two separate worlds. In one, he was a husband and father, respected in his community. In the other, he was someone seeking emotional relief and validation. Managing both identities became exhausting. Guilt followed him constantly, but instead of ending the affair, he pushed the feeling aside. He convinced himself that he was in control and that no one would get hurt if things stayed hidden. His secrecy started affecting his mental state. He became anxious and distracted at work. Simple decisions felt heavy, and sleep became restless. He checked his phone repeatedly, afraid of missing messages and equally afraid of being caught. Every unexpected call or question at home felt like a threat. His life began to feel like a carefully balanced structure that could collapse at any moment. Naina, on the other hand, grew increasingly impatient. She wanted clarity and stability. She had rebuilt her life once and feared losing control again. The uncertainty of their situation caused emotional strain. While Arvind tried to slow things down, Naina pushed for reassurance. This difference in emotional investment slowly turned affection into pressure. Despite the warning signs, neither of them stepped back. A connection had gone too far to feel simple anymore. Trust was mixed with fear, and comfort was tied to anxiety. They were no longer just sharing emotions. They were sharing risks. Every secret added weight, and every lie made the truth more dangerous. What Arvind failed to understand was that secrecy does not protect people forever. It only delays consequences. The deeper he went, the fewer exits remained. Without realizing it, both Arvind and Naina were moving toward a point where silence would no longer be enough to keep their worlds from colliding. The pressure that had been building for months finally reached a breaking point. Arvind's behavior at home became noticeably different. He was short-tempered, distracted, and often lost in thought. Small responsibilities felt irritating, and routine family moments felt like burdens. Kavita noticed these changes more clearly now. She sensed distance, not just emotional, but intentional, as if Arvind was carefully hiding parts of his life. Though she did not confront him directly, her growing suspicion added another layer of stress to Arvind's already fragile state of mind. At the same time, Naina was no longer satisfied with uncertainty. The emotional closeness that once felt comforting now felt unstable to her. She had invested deeply and expected clarity in return. The lack of direction made her restless and anxious. She feared being reduced to a secret, something temporary that could be discarded when inconvenient. Her need for reassurance grew stronger, while Arvind's ability to provide it weakened. A planned weekend trip to California was meant to bring relief. Arvind convinced himself that spending time with Naina would help restore balance. Instead, it exposed how fragile everything had become. The emotional gap between them widened during this trip. Naina wanted commitment and acknowledgement, while Arvind remained trapped in hesitation. His fear of losing his family, social image, and career kept him from making any clear decision. What once felt like escape now felt like confrontation. The atmosphere between them shifted noticeably. Trust began to erode, replaced by doubt and frustration. Arvind felt cornered, unable to move forward or backward. Naina sensed his emotional withdrawal and began to fear that she was being slowly pushed out. This realization shook her deeply. Her past experiences had taught her how abandonment felt, and she was determined not to relive it. When Arvind returned home, the tension followed him. He became more careful, more guarded. Kavita observed his silence and distant behavior, but interpreted it as work pressure. Still, the emotional gap between them grew wider. The house felt heavier, filled with unspoken questions and unresolved emotions. Arvind felt trapped inside his own life, surrounded by expectations he no longer knew how to meet. Meanwhile, Naina's emotional state worsened. The uncertainty consumed her thoughts. She began questioning everything she had believed about their connection. The idea that Arvind might choose safety over honesty made her feel used and disposable. Her attachment turned into fear, and fear slowly transformed into desperation. She needed control over a situation that was slipping away. This phase marked a dangerous shift. What had started as emotional comfort now carried the weight of possible exposure and loss. Arvind's attempts to maintain balance only made things worse. He underestimated the emotional damage caused by silence and delay. Every unanswered expectation became a silent threat, and every unresolved emotion added tension. Neither of them understood that this turning point had changed the direction of their lives permanently. The relationship was no longer driven by affection, but by fear, insecurity, and the need for self-protection. From this moment onward, consequences were no longer avoidable. They were only waiting for the right moment to surface. The news of Naina's death spread quickly through the apartment complex in San Jose. Early that morning, a neighbor had reported something unusual after noticing that Naina's door was slightly open, and the lights inside were still on. When authorities entered the apartment, they found a scene that immediately suggested violence. Naina was lying motionless in her living room. The space showed signs of struggle, but nothing appeared stolen. The absence of forced entry raised questions from the very beginning. Investigators quickly ruled out a random crime. The apartment was neat, and valuable items were untouched. This suggested that Naina had known the person who entered her home. The crime scene pointed toward planning rather than impulse. As officers documented the scene, they discovered that Naina's phone and laptop were missing, which added another layer of concern. It appeared that someone had deliberately removed evidence. The Indian American community was shaken by the news. Naina was known as a private but hard-working professional. She kept a small social circle and rarely invited people over. Friends described her as cautious and independent, someone who did not trust easily. This made the circumstances of her death even more disturbing. There was no history of threats or public conflict in her life that anyone knew of. As the investigation moved forward, detectives began reviewing Naina's recent activities. Bank records, emails, and workplace logs were examined carefully. One detail immediately stood out. Just weeks before her death, Naina had updated her life insurance policy. She had made changes that were not typical for someone her age with no dependents. The beneficiary listed was not a family member. This discovery raised serious suspicion and shifted the direction of the investigation. Further examination revealed that Naina had been under emotional stress in the days leading up to her death. Colleagues noticed she seemed distracted and tense. She had taken sudden days off work and appeared anxious during meetings. There were signs that she had been dealing with a personal issue, something significant enough to affect her daily behavior. However, she had not shared details with anyone. Investigators also looked at security footage from nearby buildings. A vehicle was seen entering the parking area late at night and leaving hours later. The footage was unclear, but the timing matched the estimated window of the crime. Phone tower data showed that Naina's phone had been active shortly before her death and then went silent. This suggested that the crime had occurred quickly and deliberately. As more evidence was collected, it became clear that this was not an isolated act of violence. Someone had planned carefully, choosing a time when attention would be minimal. The missing devices, lack of forced entry, and recent insurance changes pointed toward betrayal rather than chance. The idea that Naina had trusted the wrong person began to take shape. What initially appeared as a tragic and mysterious death was now revealing deeper layers. The investigation was no longer about who committed the crime, but why. And hidden within that question was a secret that would soon come to light, connecting Naina's private life to a truth far darker than anyone had imagined. As investigators dug deeper, the focus shifted from the crime scene to Naina's digital life. With her phone and laptop missing, detectives worked through backups, cloud data, and service providers. Email logs revealed a pattern of frequent communication with one specific contact. The messages were not explicit, but their timing and consistency suggested an intimate connection. Most of the communication happened late at night or during work hours, indicating deliberate privacy. This discovery became a major turning point in the case. Phone records showed hundreds of calls exchanged over several months, many lasting long periods. Some calls were made during hours when Naina was usually alone. The number was registered under Arvind Malhotra's name. When investigators connected the dots, they realized the relationship was not casual or brief. It was sustained, secretive, and emotionally charged. What initially looked like a personal tragedy was now tied to a hidden affair. Travel records added more weight to suspicion. Arvind's company confirmed that he had traveled frequently in recent months, including a trip to California around the estimated time of Naina's death. While business travel was part of his job, the timing raised serious questions. Hotel records showed he had checked into a location less than 30 minutes from Naina's apartment. This detail contradicted his earlier claim that he had been out of state for work meetings. Security footage from nearby streets revealed a car matching Arvind's vehicle entering Naina's apartment complex late that night. Although the footage did not clearly show his face, the vehicle's registration matched his records. Investigators compared toll booth data and traffic cameras, which placed the same car on a route leading directly from the hotel to the apartment complex. Each piece of evidence tightened the circle around him. When questioned, Arvind appeared cooperative but nervous. His statements contained small inconsistencies, particularly regarding his travel schedule and communication history. He downplayed his relationship with Naina, describing it as professional. However, investigators already knew that the volume and nature of their contact went far beyond work. The more Arvind tried to simplify the connection, the more suspicious his behavior appeared. Financial records exposed another hidden problem. Arvind was struggling with debt due to poor investments and rising expenses. Credit card statements showed mounting pressure that he had not shared with his family. Investigators began to see a possible motive forming. Fear of exposure, financial stress, and emotional entanglement were combining into a dangerous mix. Friends and coworkers described Arvind as controlled and image-conscious. He valued reputation and stability above all else. This made the possibility of his involvement even more disturbing. Detectives believed that the pressure from Naina, combined with the risk of his secret becoming public, may have pushed him toward an irreversible decision. By this stage, the investigation had uncovered enough evidence to move from suspicion to focus. The affair was no longer just a background detail. It had become the center of the case. What remained unclear was how far Arvind had gone to protect the life he feared losing, and whether the truth would finally expose the darkest choice he had ever made. As the investigation progressed, the pieces began to form a clear and disturbing picture. What once appeared to be an emotional affair, driven by loneliness, was now understood as a situation spiraling out of control. Investigators believed that Naina had reached a point where silence was no longer acceptable to her. The pressure she placed on Arvind in the final weeks suggested urgency. Evidence indicated that she wanted recognition, security, and honesty, not secrecy anymore. For Arvind, this represented the greatest threat he had ever faced. Digital traces showed that Naina had begun organizing her personal records shortly before her death. She had backed up emails, saved documents, and made changes to financial information. Investigators interpreted this as preparation, possibly for legal or personal action. It appeared that she was no longer willing to remain hidden. This realization was critical, as it explained the sudden shift in Arvind's behavior during that period. His messages became shorter, and his travel plans more calculated. The financial motive became clearer as well. Arvind's debts were increasing, and his financial stability depended heavily on maintaining his marriage and professional image. A public scandal could have resulted in job loss, legal trouble, and complete social isolation. Investigators concluded that Arvind saw exposure not just as emotional loss, but total collapse. His controlled personality and fear of losing status made him desperate to stop that outcome at any cost. Forensic analysis suggested the crime was planned. The timing aligned with Arvind's travel schedule, and the lack of forced entry indicated trust. The missing devices pointed toward an attempt to erase digital evidence. Investigators believed Arvind entered Naina's apartment under the pretense of discussion, intending to control the situation. What followed was not an accident, but a deliberate act shaped by fear and self-preservation. The emotional element was equally important. Investigators noted that Arvind did not act out of rage, but calculation. He had spent months hiding, managing lies, and maintaining balance. When that balance was threatened, his instinct was not confession, but control. This psychological profile supported the theory that the crime was motivated by the need to protect identity rather than passion. Naina's trust became the final weakness. She had believed that her emotional investment would lead to honesty. Instead, it placed her in danger. Investigators described her as someone who wanted closure and security, unaware of how far Arvind was willing to go to protect himself. Her attempt to take control of her life unintentionally sealed her fate. By the time authorities presented the evidence, the narrative was undeniable. This was not a crime of sudden anger, but the result of prolonged deception. The affair had transformed into a threat, and fear had overridden morality. The truth revealed that the greatest danger was not the forbidden's relationship itself, but the lengths one person was willing to go to keep it hidden forever. Arvind's arrest sent shockwaves through both the local community and the Indian American circles that knew him. The image of the disciplined, hard-working family man was shattered overnight. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the man accused of orchestrating a brutal murder. For many, it was a chilling reminder that appearances could be dangerously deceptive. What had seemed like a quiet, stable life was, in reality, a house of secrets that had quietly turned deadly. Kavita faced an unimaginable upheaval. The woman who had believed in her husband and the life they built together suddenly confronted betrayal, fear, and grief. She had to navigate not only the loss of trust, but also the practical realities of raising her young son alone. After Arvind's arrest, she decided to return to India, seeking safety, family support, and a fresh start. The life she had built in New Jersey was no longer a sanctuary. It was a reminder of deception and loss. Each step of her departure was heavy with emotion, from leaving behind friends to selling the house they had shared. The trial that followed was closely followed by the media. Reports highlighted the hidden affair, the meticulous planning, and the psychological pressures that had driven the crime. The story captured public attention, not just because of its tragic outcome, but because it revealed how ordinary people could be pushed to extraordinary extremes by fear, desire, and secrecy. Arvind's dual-life respectable family, man by day, secret lover by night, became central to the narrative. Investigators presented evidence step by step: digital communications, travel records, financial stress, and the planning that had led to Naina's death. Each detail painted a grim picture of premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of anger. During the trial, the human cost of the crime became painfully clear. Friends of Naina recalled her as a vibrant, independent woman whose life was cut short. Colleagues spoke of her sudden anxiety and the signs of tension she had displayed in the weeks before her death. The emotional weight of her loss was not only personal but symbolic. She had been silenced while trying to assert control over her own life. Meanwhile, Arvind's defense tried to minimize the affair and portray the events as circumstantial. However, the overwhelming evidence left little room for doubt. Ultimately, Arvind was convicted. The court determined that the murder was a calculated act driven by fear of exposure, financial pressure, and emotional entanglement. Sentencing brought closure to some, but the aftermath lingered for many. Kavita's life had been forever changed, her trust irreparably broken. Her son grew up knowing that the family he loved had been disrupted by deception and violence. The case became a cautionary tale, shared in community forums, social media, and documentaries. It illustrated how desire, secrecy, and fear could intertwine to create tragedy. What had begun as an emotional connection ended in death, betrayal, and irreversible loss. Naina's life, Arvind's choices, and Kavita's suffering became a stark lesson. Forbidden's relationships are rarely harmless, and the consequences of hidden truths can destroy more than one life. In the end, the story remained etched in memory, not as a sensational crime headline, but as a human tragedy. The Forbidden's affair that began with longing and loneliness had ended in a chain of irreversible consequences. Lives were forever changed, and the shadows of secrecy left a haunting mark that could never be undone. The quiet suburb of New Jersey and the apartment in San Jose would forever be reminders of how ordinary lives can spiral into unimaginable darkness when desire and fear collide.